The New York Times continues to work to destroy its reputation that it built up for over 100 years. It's hard to overstate how important the New York Times has been as an institution for this country. In 1893, Adolph Oakes bought the New York Times and basically revitalized journalism in the United States. This was a time in the late 1900s when Pulitzer and Hearst were making up stories. It was called yellow journalism, and the media was about as bad as it is today. Adolph Oakes buys the New York Times and basically goes the exact opposite direction, coming up with solid journalism, all the news that's fit to print, and tried to keep their biases out of it. The New York Times has been a big deal to America. I even remember a movie when I was a kid, and the last scene was after the government manipulation and everybody was lying. The guy comes down the street and the camera pans up and you see the New York Times. And you know that this hero is going to give all his information to the New York Times. They were going to be honest about it and people would believe them and his problem would be solved and wrongdoing exposed. That's not going to happen anymore. Now, the New York Times couldn't be hurting itself anymore if it lit its offices on fire. Their most recent story was called Brett Kavanaugh Fit In with Privileged Kids. She Did Not. It was written by two reporters for the New York Times who had also written a book on the Kavanaugh hearings. Unsurprisingly, they were very positive towards the women who made allegations against him, some of which they uncovered some more information here and there. Other parts that went against that narrative got downplayed a little bit. Nonetheless, on Saturday, they wrote an excerpt in the New York Times. The piece centered around Deborah Ramirez. She was the gal who said that 35 years ago at a party, Kavanaugh pushed his penis into her hand when she thought it was a fake penis, and she had some credibility problems because she first started saying, no, I don't have any stories to tell. Then she later seemed to remember things in detail, although no one else could really corroborate that event. The New York Times piece painted Deborah Ramirez as a good girl from a middle-class upbringing who went to Yale and was overwhelmed by wealth, privilege, and basically a lot of frat guys acting like jerks. But in this piece that ran on Saturday, the Times reporters brought another allegation against Kavanaugh, one that we hadn't heard before. They wrote, a classmate, Max Steyer, saw Mr. Kavanaugh with his pants down at a different drunken dorm party where friends pushed his penis into the hands of a female student. Okay, so that's weird. First of all, it said friends pushed his penis. I've thought a lot about this, and I'm not quite exactly sure of what they're alleging happened here. I don't know if multiple friends are alleged to actually have touched his penis and put it into somebody else's hands who was evidently close enough. The authors didn't say somebody pushed him into it. They didn't say... I mean, how the fuck does... Reading this carefully and multiple times, I'm a little confused exactly what is being alleged here. I'm not quite sure how friends can push my penis into the hands of somebody else, but let's just go with that right now. The first mistake that the Times did was one of just tone deafness. They tweeted out, having a penis thrust in your face at a drunken dorm party might seem like harmless fun, but when Brett Kavanaugh did it to her, Deborah Ramirez says it confirmed she didn't belong at Yale University in the first place. They took it down. They apologized. I don't know whether having a penis thrust in your face in college is harmless fun or not. It's never happened to me, but there we go. The fatal part of this story didn't become clear until a day or so later when Molly Hemingway, who's an author at The Federalist, tweeted something. Now, she's a conservative journalist, or at least a journalist working for a conservative outlet called The Federalist. She's also written a book on Kavanaugh. Hemingway was the first person to say, hey, wait a second. I actually have a copy of this book. The New York Times story doesn't mention a big fact. What was the fact? The fact was that the woman who was apparently the recipient of the penis into her hand thrusting, A, wasn't talking to anyone, especially the New York Times, and B, two of her friends said she had no memory of the incident. That's a pretty big thing that you should have in a story when you're accusing a Supreme Court justice of sexual misconduct, or at least accusing his friends of sexual misconduct, because I'm not sure whose misconduct it is if somebody's pushing my penis into somebody else. So to be clear, the New York Times breaks a bombshell allegation of another sexual harassment against a sitting Supreme Court justice, but the victim isn't talking. Her friends say she didn't remember anything, and they also didn't speak to Max Steyer, the person who brought up the allegations to begin with. Evidently, he spoke to the FBI, but never the New York Times. The Times also didn't take a look into Max Steyer's background. They called him a respected thought leader. He actually is a fairly well-respected guy in D.C., but he's also been on the Democratic side of the aisle, at one point serving as a lawyer for President Clinton, defending himself against impeachment. On the other side of that legal fight, ironically, was Brett Kavanaugh. So the now Supreme Court justice and the man who said 35 years ago his penis was flopping around were on opposite sides of at least one political and legal issue. Republicans are quick to call him a Clinton-connected attorney. That is true. He's also been for 20 years the head of a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that tries to get good government going in Washington, D.C. So he doesn't come across as a hardcore partisan, but it is fair to say that he was connected to Clinton and the Clinton legal defense team. Also, his wife had been nominated by President Obama to become a federal judge, an appointment that expired before she was confirmed. It was a horrific piece of journalism, but that didn't stop the fallout from coming. Trump, being Trump, tweeted that it was fake news all over again and that Kavanaugh should sue them for libel. I don't know if we've ever had a sitting Supreme Court justice bring up a libel lawsuit against a newspaper, but it seems a little far-fetched. On the other side of the spectrum, Democrats pounced. 5 candidates, Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, Beto O'Rourke, Booker, and Castro, came out and said this Supreme Court justice should be impeached. That's a pretty big overreaction, but they hang it on the fact that they said that this proves he lied during his confirmation hearing. To be quite honest, this article doesn't prove much of anything at all. I think that you can find your own evidence in whatever narrative you choose to believe. But in this instance, the New York Times has showed they're not a newspaper that's trying to get down to the facts of the matter. They're not trying to be what they were established in 1893 to be. The New York Times has made it pretty clear. They're part of the resistance. They're part of the political machine against Republicans, and particularly against Brett Kavanaugh. That's it for today. If you want to see how people are spinning the news you get, what you should believe, what you shouldn't believe, you can't trust the New York Times, don't even trust me, verify and check it out. Please subscribe and share this with your friends if you think it sheds some light on the news of the day. Thanks. Till next time. If you like this at all, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit the little bell icon, and it'll let you know when the next one of these videos comes up. We're also involved in the comment section, so please ask questions or give your thoughts. We'd be happy to chat with you. Finally, LaCorte News is going to be putting out a lot more videos. We're taking a very critical look at the media because they often lie. And we would love to have you on board with this and giving us your thoughts as we grow this into something real. Thanks.